Beginning with the first nascent steps of combat aviation in World War I, the fighter pilot, particularly the Ace fighter pilot, had captured the imagination of boys, men, and women, while galvanizing the qualities of manhood and courage many aspire to under fire. Since the beginning of military aviation, leaders studied the qualities and characteristics that made for the best fighter pilots in combat situations. One USAF study by Retzlaff and Gibertini divided fighter pilots into 3 groups based on personality and historic combat success. Group 1 had the right stuff, evidenced by dominant, impulsive, aggressive, and playful behavior, while Group 2 flyers possessed less driven okay stuff, characterized by stable yet compulsive behavior and little joy in the experience of flying. Group 3 pilots possessed the wrong stuff, exhibiting passive, conforming, cautious behaviors with almost zero joy in flying. And while the wrong stuff and the okay stuff were generally washed out before they earned their wings, those in the right stuff category would go on to become some of the best air aces of the Second World War, including 4 audacious flyers in the Pacific Theater of Operations who found themselves caught up in a media frenzy known as the Ace Race of World War II. Born in 1920's Superior, Wisconsin, Richard Ira Bong, known as Dick to his friends and family, grew up on a small farm in Poplar, Wisconsin, population 300, where he developed a love for mechanics and flying at an early age. Enrolling in the civilian pilot training program as a student at Superior State Teachers College, now the University of Wisconsin-Superior, before enlisting in the U.S. Army Air Corps in 1941, shortly before America's entry into World War II, following Japan's unprovoked attack on American naval assets at Pearl Harbor. Undergoing primary flight training in California, his talents and daring flying style soon caught the attention of his instructors, although he was severely reprimanded after he buzzed the deck of a ship and flew under San Francisco's iconic Golden Gate Bridge. Earning the rank of second lieutenant early in 1942, Bong was assigned to the 49th Fighter Group within the 5th Air Force out of Darwin, Australia, flying the P-38 Lockheed Lightning throughout the southwestern Pacific. First employed over the war-torn skies of Europe, the P-38 proved to be less effective than the P-47 Thunderbolt or the P-51 Mustang due to cold-related engine oil congealment problems leading to chronic engine failures. However, the plane proved its mettle in the warmer air temperatures of the Pacific Theater. It didn't take long for Bong to show his own mettle, shooting down 8 enemy planes within weeks after his arrival, at the same time becoming the leader of the 9th Fighter Squadron. Renowned for its speed and firepower, the P-38 became the essential tool behind Bong's success, where he demonstrated unmatched skill as a pilot and a marksman over the skies of New Guinea, the Philippines, and other key battlegrounds in the Pacific Theater. Known for his ability to outthink his opponents, Bong's tactics combined patience, precision, and an uncanny ability to take calculated risks. By April 12th of 1944, Bong had achieved 27 confirmed kills, surpassing the record previously held by World War I's American ace, Eddie Rickenbacker. Fearing the now revered fighter pilot would be lost if he stayed in combat, U.S. Air Force leaders sent him stateside for advanced gunnery training by the end of the month, returning to Australia as a gunnery instructor for the 5th Air Force. And while his commanding officers wanted him safely on the ground, Bong voluntarily returned to combat duty, where he flew daily missions to places like the dangerous Japanese stronghold at Ormoc Bay, amassing 40 combat victories by December of 1944. Awarded the Medal of Honor for his achievement in valor, the highest military decoration in the U.S., General Douglas MacArthur personally presented now Major Bong's medal, praising the ace for his extraordinary heroism and service. In MacArthur's words, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action above and beyond the call of duty in the Southwest Pacific area from 10 October to 15 November 1944. Born in 1920 Ridgewood, New Jersey, Thomas Buchanan McGuire Jr. grew up in Sebring, Florida, with dreams of aviation greatness, sparked by the achievements of Charles Lindbergh and other pioneering aviators of the early 20th century. Graduating Sebring High School in 1938, McGuire attended the Georgia Institute of Technology, seeking a degree in aeronautical engineering, dropping out as global tensions escalated in July of 1941, enlisting in the U.S. Army Air Corps, where he underwent rigorous flight training before earning his wings and commission as a second lieutenant in 1942. Assigned to the 49th Fighter Group in the Pacific Theater, McGuire soon experienced the theater's challenging conditions, marked by intense dogfights, grueling weather, land, and sea conditions, and the relentless advance of Japanese forces. McGuire's rapid ascent as an air ace began with his first aerial victory over New Guinea in August of 1943, where he soon learned to study his adversary's tactics with calculated aggression, at the same time capitalizing on the P-38's strengths, such as its powerful armament and superior rate of climb. Naming his plane Pudgy after his wife's nonsensical and unbefitting nickname, by late 1943, McGuire had earned the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Silver Star for his fortitude and combat effectiveness. In December of 1944, McGuire downed 7 enemy aircraft in 2 days, while solidifying his capabilities as a tactician and a pilot. Thanks primarily to exuberant American reporters and an American public thirsty for stories of heroes from overseas. As the war progressed, stories about the air race in the southwestern Pacific soon headlined major papers back in North America, as they reported on the exploits of 49th Fighter Group's top aces, Dick Bong, Tommy McGuire, Neil Kirby, and Tommy Lynch. By the time they caught America's attention, Lynch and Bong had become each other's wingmen and best friends, who were nicknamed the Flying Circus by newspapermen, until on June 8, 1944, when Lynch and Bong attacked Japanese supply ships at Haitapi Harbor, New Guinea. After setting one ship on fire, they returned for a second pass when Lynch's P-38 was hit by anti-aircraft fire from one of the surviving supply ships. Lynch's plane began to lose altitude and burn, and while he eventually bailed out, he was too close to the ground for his parachute to deploy. Lynch had 20 victories at the time of his death. Another closely followed flyer, caught up in the media's ace race frenzy, was P-47 Thunderbolt pilot Neil Kirby, who first opened his scorebook on September 4, 1943, by dropping a Mitsubishi G4M bomber and a Nakajima Ki-43, followed 10 days later with the Mitsubishi Ki-46, which saw his promotion to full colonel. On October 11th of that same year, Kirby led 4 Thunderbolts on a fighter sweep over the Japanese base at Wewak, where they ran into 40 Japanese fighters. In a dogfight that lasted nearly an hour, the American fighter pilots employed what they called dive and slash or boom and zoom attack techniques, allowing Kirby to shoot down 6 enemy planes, making him the first P-47 ace in the Pacific Theater. On March 5, 1944, with 22 victories under his belt, Kirby flew a combat patrol with Captain William Dunham and Major Samuel Blair. Approaching Dagwa Airfield at Wewak, the flight intercepted 3 Kawasaki Ki-48s of the 208th Sentai. Kirby opened fire on one of the planes, and as he circled back for a second run, he was attacked by a Ki-43 from the 77th Sentai, and before Wingman Dunham could shoot it down, Kirby's Thunderbolt crashed into the jungle below. Dunham and Blair unsuccessfully searched for him until they ran short on fuel and were forced to return to Sater Airfield. That left Bong and McGuire as the last 2 survivors of the ace race, and while Bong had the numerical advantage of kills, by the time McGuire transferred to Bong's newly formed 475th Fighter Group, McGuire had long since proven his mastery of the deflection shot, which allowed him to accurately visualize where the enemy plane was going to be when he fired his guns ahead and above the enemy's position, letting the pull of gravity drop the shots into McGuire's intended target, oftentimes dropping an enemy aircraft from as far as a half a mile away. With Bong on an extended leave back in the States, reporters crowded around McGuire for interviews, as the ace confidently boasted that he would soon pull ahead in the race due to Bong's absence, but instead, the Japanese Air Force literally disappeared from the skies over New Guinea. For 5 agonizing months, McGuire flew hundreds of hours, sometimes 2 missions a day, watching his chances for becoming the greatest fighter pilot that ever flew vanish from his grasp, while the Air Corps, in recognition of his leadership capabilities, promoted him to commanding officer of the 431st Squadron and moved him to Hollandia. The move proved to be an agonizing one, when at age 22, he was forced to sit down and write relatives of dead or missing sons about the circumstances surrounding their deaths. In response, McGuire grew distant from the men in his command, since he'd fly with a guy one day and then write a letter home the next. Reaching the Pacific Theater in June of 1943, Charles Lindbergh arrived on a special tour, largely to give the world's most famous aviator some wartime combat experience. McGuire and Lindbergh became fast friends, even bunking together, while Lindbergh advised P-38 pilots how to squeeze hundreds of extra miles out of a tank of gas. The two flew missions together, leading Lindbergh to comment that McGuire was one of the finest pilots he'd ever seen. McGuire kept racking up kills as he chased after Bong's record, but when Bong returned to the Pacific to score his 35th kill, the War Department decided that the greatest ace of all time was more valuable as a propaganda tool than a pilot. In response, they awarded him the Congressional Medal of Honor, and when Bong complained to McGuire that the War Department had taken away his airplane, McGuire said, "Come on over to our place. We have a plane for you anytime you want to fly." So Bong showed up at the 431st base at Hollandia, looking for a fight. The two would go hunting together at the delight of reporters. However, when Bong hit 40 kills, the War Department sent him on a bond tour around the United States, giving McGuire his chance to surpass Bong's record. On Christmas Day, 1944, McGuire downed 3 Japanese aircraft over Manila, while the next day he struck down a 4th. Stalled at 38 kills, flyers at the base scrambled for ideas about how to get McGuire over the top to 41 victories, while the Associated Press and the New York Times began drafting profiles about McGuire's feats to be published upon confirmation of his ascension to number 1. Together, 431st Flyers cooked up a mission early on the morning of July 7, 1945, where McGuire and his other P-38s took off to hunt Japanese planes. Heavily armed and loaded with extra drop tanks to increase their range, an hour into the flight marred by limited visibility, a single Japanese plane flashed by the formation of P-38s, and when the Lightnings winged over to give chase, McGuire ordered each pilot to retain their drop tanks, since he didn't think the lone Japanese fighter was up for a fight against 4 heavily armed and faster Lightnings. Instead, the Japanese plane did swing around, firing on the formation as a second Japanese plane stumbled onto the dogfight and joined in the battle. Hearing the distress calls of his wingman, McGuire turned into the battle, but what happened next, no one can be sure. Some felt that a lucky shot had ended McGuire's life, while others, like McGuire's crew chief, felt that the added weight of McGuire's drop tanks contributed to the plane's breakup when McGuire banked into his usual steep turn, indicating that every plane McGuire had ever flown had returned home bent out of true and missing rivets due to the violent turns McGuire frequently forced upon his equipment. Combined with his low altitude and weighty drop tanks, McGuire never stood a chance. Whatever the ultimate cause of the crash, Tommy Maguire's death sent shockwaves throughout the Pacific theater. A hero who had seemed invincible was dead, and while the effect on morale in the South Pacific was deafening, it was even worse back home. His young wife Virginia was devastated when the husband she had barely known was honored at a ceremony in Paterson, New Jersey, where Marilyn Maguire accepted her husband's posthumous Medal of Honor. After the ceremony, Charles Lindbergh took Marilyn aside to tell her what a great man she had been married to. After his Bond tour, Bong became a test pilot assigned to Lockheed's Burbank, California plant, where he flew P-80 Shooting Star fighter jets at the Lockheed Air Terminal. On August 6, 1945, he took off to perform an acceptance flight of a newly minted P-80A when his primary fuel pump malfunctioned during takeoff. Unable to switch to his auxiliary fuel pump before the plane stalled, Bong ejected too low for his parachute to open. His death became front-page news across the nation, sharing the headlines that day with the bombing of Hiroshima.